All right, the Akkadians and the Babylonians. All right, Mesopotamia is a Greek term. Basically, what it means is the land between two rivers, which is what we're talking about right in here. Basically, the Tigris and Euphrates River. The Tigris is up here, the Euphrates is down here. Now, the Sumerians developed the earliest civilization. Now, just so you know, we're talking about down here where it says summer. Down here, this is the nicest part between the two. All right, they were independent city-states. Basically, they're not one country that's a city-state. They build walls around it, and they basically had farms out around them. And if warring people came after them, they would all hide in the city walls, and they would fight against each other. You hear about other city-states like that. Okay, now, this is huge to understand. These are religious in nature. These are not pyramids. These are called ziggurats. Now, they are not a tomb, but they are religious. They are temples. Now, they're not hollow inside like a pyramid would be where you could bury somebody, but they are completely solid, except for the very top. You can see you can go inside there, a little temple on top. But yeah, these were for religious, and they had gods for everything. They were polytheistic. Okay, Sargon the First. Now, he basically unites the city-states down in Sumer and basically creates the first empire. He basically goes by and takes over each city and then therefore controls them all. And his kingdom is eventually called Akkad. He's called the Akkadians, and basically he rules all of them, and he develops a king or emperor, whatever you want to call him. All right. Not exactly a great likeness, but that's made out of bronze, and that's the Akkadians like the big long beards. He takes over all of Mesopotamia eventually. He destroys the walls of the city-states that he's not his capital, and basically that way he can get his army in and attack people. And that's how he takes over. As soon as he comes in and takes them over, he knocks down the walls. Now, the walls were made out of mud bricks, so they weren't real hard to break. Usually most people saw them and thought, oh, I don't want to mess with it. They went away. Sargon took the time to knock the walls down. And this is huge. He sets up the fact that his son would be the next king. He utilized tributes. This basically, he made people pay taxes. The Akkadians are the first people to set up their own language. This is called cuneiform. It's a bunch of little triangles and lines, and depending on how they're put together, it means something. We got a little bit of idea what cuneiform means now. We haven't completely broken it, but we have a pretty good idea. Most of it was for accounting, to know how much money you had and things like that. Although what you did see last week, the story, the creation story of the Sumerians, that was also written down in cuneiform. Okay, a new city-state pops up. This is called Babylon. This is after Sargon dies out. This is about 100-something years after he died. Hammurabi is the guy who pops up. Now, you read about Hammurabi yesterday in his code. He was considered to be the great lawgiver. He's the first one who put down law on paper and tablets, had it posted everywhere where people could read it. And it was really important because you knew if you did something wrong, this is what's going to happen. Was it pretty cruel and inhumane? Yes, but it was what it was. So if you stole something, you got your hand cut off. If you lied, they cut your tongue out. Other punishments were much more severe. We won't get into that. Basically, like if you got caught with somebody else's wife, yeah, just use your imagination on that one. Hammurabi did what Sargon did. He conquers all of Mesopotamia, and this is called the Babylonian Empire, not to be confused later on with the Chaldeans that would call their empire the Second Babylonian Empire under Nebuchadnezzar, but we'll get to those guys. Okay, after he dies, and what you're going to realize, after Sargon died, his son didn't do a very good job. It fell apart. After Hammurabi dies, it all falls apart. So these are like, even though they try to set up their sons to take over, it doesn't work. And we're not going to spend much time talking about Hammurabi Code because you already did that yesterday. But basically, it was important to understand, and this is important, that it was the first time that the law was written down. Okay, we already talked about that. We already talked about that. Okay, the Assyrian Empire. This is the upper. This is going to be farther to the east because they fight with the Egyptians. They actually take the Egyptians out a couple of times. But basically, they cover a lot more ground. They use advanced weapons. Now, when you say what's advanced, these are the guys who invented the wheel, we think. They had a chariot. They could do something crazy that nobody else could do. They could get horses, go really fast, and shoot bow and arrow, and they wiped out their other people because everybody else is just on foot. So this is crazy. And they're also from an area that actually had horses. Egypt did not have horses. That's why they kicked Egypt's butt a lot. Okay, the Assyrian Empire, basically, their capital was Nineveh. This is more over towards the Mediterranean, and their favorite god, Ashur, was the god of war. So if that's your favorite god, it's going to make sense that these people are pretty good at war. Basically, they built aqueducts. They were fairly sophisticated. Most of their technology they stole when they conquered other people. And basically, they fall apart following, I can't even say that guy's, Ashurbanipal. When that king died, they actually had multiple kings that were actually very successful. But when he dies, the empire falls apart, and their capital city gets taken over after his death. We just said that. Okay. Basically, Nineveh had a city wall. This was fairly impressive, that the walls were 200 feet high, and you could actually have chariots running along the top. So basically, the walls as thick as like a major highway would be. Basically, they were the first people to realize that if you bring food inside and store it, if people come and try to attack you, you can live off the food for a long time, and basically they'll get tired and give up and go away. The way they took over places is they invented the wheel, so they could put a battering ram on wheels and run it into the city gates and take people over. And we already talked about the chariot, and they were archers. They were using bow and arrow. So basically, they were very strong militarily, but they were not strong. They had a lot of political problems, and that kind of basically fell apart from within. After Nineveh fell, the Babylonians rose to power. Now, this is really the Akkadians, so don't get confused. Nabopolassar was the first king, but he just unifies the empire. But basically, it's his son Nebuchadnezzar who is the first great Neo-Babylonian king, and he is written about in other history, like the history of the Jews or their holy book, the Torah. Christians write in the Bible, but basically he is the first great king. He sets up one of the biggest empires, and then his empire kind of falls apart in the middle of his reign, and then he brings it back and right before he dies. But again, like most empires, once he dies, so does the empire. And he goes all the way, the way he conquers, he goes into almost to Egypt. He's got almost the whole Middle East taken over. And one of the really cool things that he did, it's one of the ancient wonders of the world, he had hanging gardens. Now, this is out in the middle of the desert, and he is able to create gardens that had aqueducts bringing in water, and they would trickle down. And basically, they were able to grow stuff out in the middle of the desert, which is going to help feed his people. So that's really, really impressive. This is where the first sundial pops up, so they could tell time. And if you wonder why there are 60 seconds in a minute, 60 minutes in an hour, in 24 hours, these are the people who decided all this. Their math was based on base 60. Why they would do that, I don't know, but time is still used that way. And if you've ever heard the Bible story of the Babylonians building a Tower of Babel, It's basically a big tower that was supposed to reach up to heaven and fell down. We don't know if that's true. We see it in Babylonian writings, we see it in the Bible and the Torah, but we have found no archaeological evidence of that. And that's about it.